Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar. My name is Chris Monsier. I'm a professor in civil and environmental engineering. So the instructor for the class this quarter is Dr. Lai-Ming Wang in the University Studies for Urban Studies and Planning Department. So if you're a student, we're passing around the sign-in sheet. Make sure you check it. If you're online, make sure you're signed in. But we're very pleased today to have Dongo Chang from the city of Seattle to talk about healthy communities and how their policies are improving things in Seattle. So I'm going to turn it right over to Dongo. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So thank you for hosting me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to actually look around afterwards and seeing all the great things that Portland does because we've taken a lot of cues from our peers, and a lot of the things that you'll see in this presentation will remind you of what you're seeing in Portland. So my talk is about building healthy communities. This is a picture of Pike Place Market, one of our central areas where people gather. And it's really about creating a community where people want to be, it's enjoyable, it's not really about going through, right? So having a place that really is special for people who live in the community. Our Department of Transportation, our missions, vision, mission, and core values. Our vision is to have a Seattle that's thriving, equitable community powered by dependable transportation. Our mission is to deliver a transportation system that provides safe, affordable access to places and opportunities. And we're committed to 6 core values: equity, safety, mobility, sustainability, livability, and excellence. And of course, you know, the equity aspect really has to do with making sure that our transportation system in our city is accessible for everyone, and that we provide a system that's seamless and enjoyable and a place that people want to be. So my presentation is going to go around a little bit on a lot of these topics. I want to give you a background on what's happening in Seattle and some of the trends, what are really our policies and growth strategies that drive the decisions that we do, and then this is really exciting. It's about our street typology and how we intend to form our streets to really meet the needs of the people. And then talk about safety and how we're doing these projects in incremental fashion and in wholesale changes to ensure that we provide our transportation system. You can see, similar to Portland, Seattle is a very beautiful place. There's downtown right there. We got Elliott Bay. We have the islands and the Olympic Mountains, Lake Washington. We have a cut down the middle that's navigable with a lock system. And then we have movable bridges, bicycle bridges, similar to Portland. And then we have 2 floating bridges that traverse our water, Pike Place Market. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the market and how special place it is and the decisions that we make as planners and engineers can actually enhance or create barriers for these special places. And then how we create these places where people can travel through in a transportation mode and be a gathering place where you can actually socialize and be the social humans that we want to be in cities. So Seattle, like many cities, large portion of our landmass is streets. 26% of our right-of-way is street system. So we are a large landlord, and we take that responsibility seriously. Almost 98% of our population live within a quarter mile of a transit stop. So very accessible, really, for people to get around. So we need to make sure that that accessibility is inclusive and that everyone has access to them. Fairly walkable, 6 in large city for walkability, even though we're hilly and rainy. And then typical arterial width is very narrow, 60 to 66 feet. So even though we think that, you know, that 26% is massive, actually there are corridors that are fairly narrow. And so how we allocate that space has a huge impact on how people get around. And Seattle is growing. We've been growing for a long time. This is a building that was under construction a couple of years ago. It's the Demark building. Now it's the F5, 48 stories. And it has 300 parking stalls underneath it, right? So that's a lot of cars coming out of this one building. Just down the street, on the same street, is another building that's being proposed, and it's under review right now. 100 stories, right? So we're growing up, right? And FAA has concerns about flight path on this building. How many parking stalls? 750, right? That's a lot of vehicles. How are we going to be able to handle that kind of space that's needed for all those vehicles coming out? So it's really important that we plan for moving people, but we can't move these buildings, right? We can't remove building to have the capacity for these vehicles. And I checked this morning in our land use site, we have 17,000 applications for land use changes in Seattle. That's a lot of planning for growth, right? So it doesn't mean that it stops now. There's still more happening. As trends, our population is growing about 23% in the last 10 years. Collisions are going down. The reason is that with all the growth and all the construction that's happening, people can't go very fast. They're going pretty slow, right? And so the number of collisions are actually going down. And then of course, because of the congestion, number of people that's able to travel on that limited amount of space is flattened out. We're seeing an increase in 2018 because there's a whole lot more Ubers and Lyfts that are in our network, and so that travel volume is going up, and we're seeing that. And how are we able to accommodate all that 23% without really increasing our transportation network? It's because everybody is taking transit. It's an incredible story where because of the constrained system and people are investing in our transit system, and as we provide more service, we can't provide it as fast as people want it. And so we're playing catch up. We had a mass transit system proposal way back in the 70s that went to Atlanta, and now we're building that system out now with our light rail system. And how do we compare to other peer cities that are more mature? Our bus growth is out of the charts. You can see year over year, huge demand, and people are using transit in our city. And our policy, this is what drives what we do as public servants, is to serve what our policy and elected leaders ask us to do. And what they say is that because Seattle's already mature, we already have a transportation system that's already set up, we're not going to expand that anymore, right? We're going to use the tools that's available to support the growth development pattern of these urban villages and urban centers. And so how is that working? Since 1994, 80% of our growth that you're seeing occurred in our urban villages and urban centers. And what are those? So our urban centers are the big, tall buildings, right? These are the downtowns. There's a downtown right here, our U District, Northgate. Those are the urban centers. They have the big, high density, a lot of growth that's planned. That is connected by light rail to downtown and University District. In 2 years, they'll connect to Northgate. So, you know, about a year away. Our mass transit system is coming online. But in the meantime, our bus system is making the heavy haul for all these locations. And our urban villages are these colored areas. These are our business centers, right? So our Ballards, Fremont, and Capitol Hill, and they are the locations where we are identifying higher growth, right? So in our by 2035, 60% of our future growth, so 78,000 additional housing and 150,000 additional jobs will be concentrated in our urban centers and urban villages. So that's our growth plan, right? So our mandate is very clear. We got to make sure that there's good interoperability for people to get around between our urban centers and urban villages, either through good transit use, good land use, walking and biking connection to our mass transit. And so our comp plan really focuses on making the right use of our right-of-way, that 26% of our right-of-way space. We need to make sure that we have safe, affordable, reliable, and high quality network for people to choose their travel options, right? So this is Dexter Avenue, where we have a good bus connection. It's in lane. We have good bicycle access, even though this is a very hilly street, really high pedestrian and bike use. In our downtown, we want to make sure that our freight and goods are delivered to the businesses and communities that need them on time, and that where there's opportunity, use that space in multiple purpose so that it enhances the businesses and people that are on that street. And why is it important for that mode share? Because if you think about that one person driving alone and you shift them to a carpool, you free up 55% of that space. But if they can take a bike, take the bus, or they walk, it's in the 90%. So that's why we're focusing so much on these modes in order to free up the space for people that need to take the car. And here's a visual of our downtown, 2nd Avenue, 177 cars with 200 people, takes 2 full blocks. All the space used for cars, right? 177 cars. Remember that 750 parking garage is right up here, right? It's going to take the entire grid in order to accommodate that demand, right? Or we could put them that demand on buses or light rail or bikes or people walking, and these modes will create space for people that need it on their automobiles. And so the biggest change that we're taking that our elected leaders have done is with our comprehensive plan, we used to do what's called level service. Who heard of level service? We're measuring something to serve the transportation function, right? And traditionally that's been auto delay. Well, that has been changed. So we used to measure screen lines and what the volume is. And we used to say that volume of capacity, if it goes over a certain threshold of the volume of capacity, stop all growth. We got to figure out what to do, make sure that we could accommodate it, and then we can re-permit growth. Now it's changed to mode share. So downtown wise, we're going from 23% drive alone to 18% by 2035. That gives us now a mandate, right? So people who are driving, we need to shift that down. We need to increase the people who are walking, people who are living close or taking transit, right? So that helps us. And their concentrate we have very aggressive mode share goals in our urban centers and our villages, a little less on the single family home areas. And this is what it looks like. So this is Seattle and the number of jobs. In 2011, that's about 200,000 jobs in that center space there. And then there's 200,000 jobs in Bellevue and Redmond. You can see the space that's needed in order to accommodate all the employment travel trips, right? For that 200,000 job versus our downtown. 2018, this has grown to 235,000 jobs in the east side. And you can see downtown is now 301,000. So more people in a more concentrated fashion, and we have the mass transit system in that place. That's why you're seeing that 100-story growth, because we have the transportation network that's in place. And if you think about that person who's in that garage, 4 or 5 floors down, at the end of the day trying to come out, it's a very frustrating experience, right? Trying to get out to that very congested grid. That's why it's so important for us to ensure that people who are choosing the mode that we want to encourage, which is bus, walking, and biking, is accommodated in the most efficient and the most desirable way. Our downtown, about 25% of the people drive alone into downtown, and 75% take the other modes. And these are the surveys that's done by for the large employers. And you can see what's going on. The downtown jobs are growing, and drive alone rate is going down, right? So we're trying to get that to our low levels. And then what's happening for safety trends? Seattle tends to be one of the safest cities, large cities in the US, but we experience about 20 deaths a year in Seattle. That's people's lives that's impacted. In 2018, we saw 14 deaths, which is historically one of the lower fatality numbers, but we're seeing an increase in 2019. So we're hovering around that 20 deaths in 2019. And it has to really do with people who are walking, people who are biking. When they are impacted by a person in a vehicle, they don't fare very well. So there's an urgency for us to really see where those collisions are occurring and mitigate for those so that they're less severe, that is survivable. What we're seeing is that 7% of total crashes in the city are people who are walking, biking, or in a motorcycle. They account for about 90% of fatalities. So they're really disproportionately impacted. They occur on arterial streets. So 90% of the fatalities and serious injuries are occurring on our arterial streets. And people who are walking, 60% of the pedestrians are older. So people who are more frail, they're not able to recover as quickly as younger. And so we need to really think about our aging population, ensure that our infrastructure and our streets are accommodating for all users, especially people who are older. And a lot of it has to do with speeds and how a vehicle driver impacts and interacts with people who are walking and biking. Lower speeds, I mean, it's just going to be just minor fender bender, right? So you're going to be able to survive those kind of interactions. But at the higher level of 30 to 40 miles per hour, that's a probability chances go down. So at 40 miles per hour, estimates have been shown that 90% of the time you might not be able to survive. So 60% of our network, our street network in Seattle is residential streets. They account for 25% of the total collisions that we're seeing, but they only account for 10% of the serious and fatal injuries. So it's really low speed, and our arterials is where all of our serious injuries and fatalities are occurring. And this is a typical developed street, residential street in Seattle. You can see that it's fairly narrow, 25-foot curb to curb. We allow parking on both sides. And so can you imagine driving 30 miles per hour on the street? 25, 20, maybe? It's about maybe 15, 12. You'll see someone come the other direction, you're stopping, you're backing up a block. And then this becomes really a design change. We're engineering the street to be a local street, and that is, it's really for that local access. And if you're trying to make up time and you're in a hurry, you might try this 4 or 5 times. And then probably after the 5th time, you realize this is not worth it, and I'll be on the arterial where that long distance trip should be. And then at the intersections in our residential streets where the collisions occur, we've been installing traffic circles since the 70s. We have about 1,500 of these, and we've reduced injury collisions by 97% by installing these, and all collisions by 90%. We have people who love our traffic circles. There's a boat in the middle, and this is Maddie and her kids. In the middle, they come out and they enjoy these beautiful landscaping, places to sit. We have mature trees that are like growing out of the traffic circle. Where you need emergency vehicle access, we use traffic dots. So these are just mounds that we created with some texture, just to give people some feeling that you need to go around rather than straight through. And then people do really fun things, right? They take ownership of these traffic circles. And then these create that community connection. People come out, they talk to each other. So how do we influence that speed on your street? In Washington State, we've been very lucky. We have a safe speed bill that allows cities on residential streets to reduce those speed limits to 20 miles per hour without an engineering study. And then arterial streets, you got to go through a process in order to set your speed limit. And in 2016, we took that opportunity to reduce all of our residential streets to 20 miles per hour, which is 2,400 miles of streets. And then all the arterial streets that are not signed are at 25. And now we're going through our process of revising. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story on how the data we're seeing and our approach. So traditional method is like, we go out there, how do people travel on the street unimpeded? It's called the 85th percentile. And people will do the rational thing, they'll drive the safe speed, right? And it's okay, that's your speed limit, and you design for that. That's the traditional method, and you let the drivers decide. That might be really well for rural areas, but when you're interacting with other things that are happening on the street, probably not the best approach. You really need to really take a proactive approach. And so what we did was 80% of all of our collisions are occurring on our urban villages and urban centers. And so in those areas, we wanted to influence that speed. And so we took an approach of take this systemic approach of using 50 percentile speed. What are the modes that are using it? look at the driveway spacing, right, and then came up with a rational method of setting speeds. But again, that's really not the approach. Your approach that we would like to take and that we're embarking on is, what is the speed on that street that's appropriate for the land use and the development and the use that you want? And then set that speed and put all the elements in there to achieve that speed. That is the model that we're going towards. So here's some data that we got. In our downtown, entire downtown got retimed to 25 miles per hour, was 30 before. You can see when it was retimed, the crashes went down, number of serious injury crashes went down. So 13% reduction in total crashes, a 20% reduction in serious injury crashes. In our urban villages where we set lower speeds, we saw all crashes in Finney and Greenwood, almost a 50% reduction in all crashes, and then 37% reduction in serious injury and fatal. Green Lake and Roosevelt, another nearby urban village area, 26% reduction in top end speeding, right? So these are just reminding people you need to slow down, right? And then having those tools had this kind of impact. So, and it's in a broad area that we impact, that we reduce these speeds. And then these are the corridors that we're seeing a lot of collisions. This is Rainier, our highest crash corridor. Used to be an old state highway. We have a beautiful commercial core where the community that wants to come out, and we're seeing horrific crashes that were occurring. And so we just did a really simple revision on how people travel with a what's called the road diet. Probably heard that before, where a 2-lane is revised to 1 lane in each direction with center turn lane. And you can see it's fairly simple. We did it overnight with a hydroblaster. This machine went out, took with high pressure water, took the old striping out, and then our paint truck came back and repainted it right afterwards. We saw significant results. Collisions reduced by 15%. This is a area of a community where they depend on the bus to travel. As our highest productive transit route, Route 7. And we were concerned about impact to the transit. And so we made the key transit investment, make sure that we have the queue jumps, bus only lanes. And when we modeled this for the worst of the work condition, and it was about 2 minutes of impact to the bus. And because of the conservative nature of that, and we talked to the community about, at worst, you'll have a 2-minute delay. Is that okay with you to reduce some of these collisions? And they told us yes. After we implemented it, we actually improved that service by a minute. So sometimes it's good to over deliver. And then these are the results that we're seeing, that this top end speeding is because we are now controlling that speed with the platoon, right, with a lead vehicle. That top end speeding, people are going more than 40 miles per hour. It was almost 1,200 people that were traveling that speed. We reduced by 80 to 76%. So that severity of the collisions are reduced using these simple tools. So this is the street typology methodology that we're using in Seattle. If you look up Streets Illustrated Seattle, you'll see our design manual. All of our streets in our entire city is mapped in this what's called a street type and where they're located. So principal arterial, those are your big streets that you're supposed to carry the long distance. There could be an industrial area, urban center, downtown, and urban village main, right? So our target speed for those is 25 to 35. We put a little asterisk in there because sometimes these are state highways or freeways. And so we need to take more closer look at those locations for the appropriate speed, but that's our target speed. Our minor arterials are 25 to 35. And then our neighborhood residential and alleys are 15 to 20 miles per hour. So you go to Streets Illustrated, you click on the map, it's a GIS map that comes up. This is our downtown, and downtown grid comes up, and you can click on a link. So this is a link on 2nd Avenue between Marion and Columbia. It tells you that this is a downtown principal arterial, and it has a right-of-way width of 87 feet. You click on that more info, it'll give you the next information on what's needed. And then it says that on our modal plan, there's a higher level bicycle facility, and then it's a high priority for improving pedestrians. And so you click on the more info, and this is the design guides that you click on one of these elements to give you the specifics, what the width is, what elements you need to be considering, and you can see the range of values for the modes that you want to accommodate. So flex zone is a zone where you can have loading, unloading, you can have parklets, you can have various different curb space use, 2 travel lanes, transit only lane, protected bike lane, and sidewalks. This is 2nd Avenue on that same street, looking down, and you can see that 5 lanes where all the cars were parked. Remember the 177 cars? They were parked here. And it's a pretty good palette. And so we took our first stab and put in the protected bike lane. That's your flex lane on the side. Allows people to get in and out from the curbside to the sidewalk. And then there's a bus only lane on the other side. So when we made this change, we focused on the intersection because that's where all the conflicts are occurring. Because we are, before it was actually, it was a permitted left turn, right? So it's one-way street, you're making this left turn to get up the hill. We're seeing a lot of pedestrian conflicts with the drive because so many people were crossing that people were getting frustrated. I'm gonna turn right at the very end of the cycle, right? And so by giving a time for the left turners with a protected left turn, the left turn arrow, now you can relax. You know, there'll be time for that left turn to occur without the conflicts. We reduce pedestrian crashes with this treatment by 80%. And this, you know, getting some data really helps. I looked this morning before coming to see what the this year's numbers were, and it was shocking. When we started, we counted 332 riders on sidewalks and on the street itself, right? So we had video for the entire day. For one day in August, it's a Wednesday. And a year later, after we put in a demonstration project, right, to just separate with some flex posts, we saw a 300% increase. And then we've been making connections to this facility. And you can see earlier this year, it's 3,300 vehicles. These are, what's that? That's one day, Chris, yes. So how does that compare? So 2013, we looked the year before, that street carried 15,200 vehicles in a day, ADT, right, average daily traffic. 2015, a year after, we carried more people, 20,100. So it didn't really, making that change really didn't impact the throughput capacity. And then last year, 21,400, right? So this really, what people who are really concerned about, it's gonna gridlock, it's gonna create these capacity problems. What we're seeing is the opposite, is actually organizing how people get around, it's more vibrant, and that we're able to carry more people with this organization. And what about safety? So we looked at 4 years before and after, right? Now we have all that data. 14% reduction in total crashes, even with a higher volume of people and people traveling through and biking. 21% reduction in injury crashes, 22% reduction in bike crashes, 16%. These are total numbers. These aren't rates. Total numbers. 16% reduction in pedestrian crashes for the entire corridor. So organizing really did help the safety and mobility and viability for how people access these streets. I would have never imagined a family riding the street, and now I see this routinely in our downtown on this facility. So this is our road diet flow chart we use all the time, and this has been published now in FHWA guidance, right? So it's a proven countermeasure. You look at so these are the tools that we use on a day in and day out. Now we use the other tool, which is that street typology. When I told you about the Rainier Corridor, where we said about 25,000, don't do it, right? That was actually 28,000 when we did that. And that's why we did that disclosure to the community, said, you know, there's gonna be impact to you when we do this project. And they said, yes, we got that permission to go forward with that project. And every street and every community is really different. You really need to engage and understand what the specific needs are so that you can really address specific needs of a particular street. This is a corridor that we just did some simple restriping. It's a 20-foot each direction. We had a peak hour restriction on each side. So they took a community traffic onto the freeway and back, right? And we saw a horrific crash that impacted the family, and the community demanded us that we come out and address it. And we did a simple rechannelization along here. And what we saw, you can see, is a significant reduction in that high-end speed, right? So people who are going 40 above, and then, you know, the safety-wise, you can see 50% reduction in crashes. It just helps organize how people behave. This is a tool that we've been using more and more with help of our fire department. We identify fire access routes, those routes that they need specific routes to and from the fire station into a major arterial. Those locations where we need this tool, we'll put in, after consultation, speed cushions, so that they still slow the fire department down, but we want to make sure that they're still able to navigate without the big impact of the vertical deflection. Why is this important? Because it has huge impact. These are school crossings where we raise the crossing for the kids, and you can see people who are going really excessive where kids are walking. It could almost eliminate them with this device. So if you're going 35 and you hit that once, you might bottom out, maybe lose an oil pan. The next time you might go a little bit slower. It changes behavior. It's like a policeman that's there all the time. And we try a bunch of different tools. There's enforcement cameras. You can see the high-end speeding and how we are impacting it. You can see that the most effective is the vertical physical tools. You can see here, this is Emerson, where we had people who were, this is a school route, residential street, right? We had people who were going excessive where we were seeing before 85th percentile speed of 34 miles per hour. 34 miles per hour, that's pretty fast, right? We put the speed humps in, and you can see it's pretty much eliminated. 97% and almost 100% of people were going above that 35 miles per hour. Leading pedestrian interval, this is a tool that we haven't used a lot, and we are utilizing now from our NACDO City Peer Exchange. You just give the people who are walking 3 to 7 seconds a head start to get into the intersection. What it has shown is that it reduces pedestrian vehicle interactions and crashes by 60%. So we had 9 locations between the 2009 and 2018. Utilizing this tool, it was 40 to 60% reduction. They cost, depending on the location, because you have to change out the controllers. If it's an older location, about 10,000 on average per location. We have 144 intersection funded for implementation in the next 2 years. And now we took it a step further and said that when we time a signal, that tool is going to be used. So all 1,100 of our intersections are going to have that treatment. But we're also using, you know, why this location versus another, right? So we have some criteria on those locations where we're seeing collisions, or people are using, vulnerable populations are using it. So those are ranked higher, and the urban villages and urban centers. We have a tool called BPSA, Pedestrian Bike Safety Assessment. You can look up that study. It's a statistical model that looks at the topological features of a street, number of people that's using it, intersection control, whether just lighting. And we were able to, using that tool, be able to identify locations that have a type of collision that's likely to occur before it occurs, right? So if you have a lanes with a left turn that's not protected and someone's turning against it, and a lot of pedestrians that's crossing with the grade, we know that there's a chance for a left turn collision to occur. And by ranking, we're able to say this is the highest location for our city to put in a countermeasure, which is a left turn signal, right? Or ban that left turn, or whatever that happens to be, in order to prevent collisions from occurring. Red light enforcement, people hate it, and we understand why, because they're punitive. They can they're not really solving that issue, right? But what we found is that we're using data to put them at locations where we need an immediate solution, because we're seeing these crashes occur. We have 24 locations where we had 20 with 3-year before and after data. And these were just located where the crashes were occurring. What we found was that the angle collisions were reduced by 46%. Again, because this is 3 years before and 3 years after. Pedestrian collisions reduced by 1/3, and rear end collision reduced by 15%, and all collisions reduced by 1/4. So we actually had our media ask us, what's your data? What is the data showing? And we showed this and provided this information to our local media, and they said we need to do more based on this data. So and we're hesitant because again, they really want to do the physical improvements so that these collisions don't occur. And we also have school safety zone cameras. These are automated speed cameras. And what we're finding is that they are effective. People who are getting tickets, they don't get a second ticket. Collisions are down, so we got 50% reduction in total collisions, 71% reduction in collision during the camera hours, and then no pedestrian collision during the time the cameras are active. But again, they're kind of a band-aid, right? So what we really want to do is impact the behavior so that it doesn't occur. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a story, a project, and how we are trying to provide those options for people. So South Lake Union is area where Amazon and Vulcan and just a whole host of Google, Facebook, a lot of employment in an area that used to be not very heavily developed, and it's growing very fast. So it's the fastest growing portion of our city. And you can see here's Westlake right here, and you can see it's a arterial street that cuts right through this very weird diagonal grid. South Lake Union is right here, and because there's no choices, everybody drives, and then when they drive, they get frustrated, right? And so our project was to provide better bus service. We routed some additional bus service along this route, and then made some treatments to ensure that the bus service is reliable. So we created new transit lanes, upgraded transit stops, made some signal improvements, widened sidewalks and bus stops. You can see we did some red bus lanes towards the end. But what we saw was that this was not sustainable long term. Didn't do something now, right? And the things would halt, and that people won't be able to get around. And there are a lot of people using that street. Between 5 and 6, we had 2,800 people that were trying to get on the bus. And so when we proposed this project, our newspaper, amazing newspaper, great journalists, they were concerned because they experience this every day, right? It's like, how can the city be so stupid to be able to, to even think up this project? And they really told us that we shouldn't be doing this. You have this vibrancy down here, and you're going to stop it with this project, right? And so April 1st is my birthday, and this column came out, all right? It said that lots of people, right? So 2 lanes closed on Westlake Avenue, right? And we and nobody noticed. That's the headline, right? So what would happen if you kick cars off half the lanes in big downtown arterial? Gridlock, right? That was a feeling that everybody had a year ago when we had the outreach. And there were so much comments from the community saying this is something that we should do. But our analysis showed that it's really needed and we can make it work. So we did. And so my comment was that, we haven't heard of any operational issues, so it's working, right? So yeah, what they were seeing was this pent up demand on the street. And then when we made the change, people who were frustrated driving took the bus because that was the easiest way out. That was the most convenient. That's the story of Seattle. That's the story of transit. That's the story of how we serve our communities better. Give people choices. They'll choose a choice that's the most reliable, easiest, and if you make it the best option, it actually makes it better for others, right? So we took a lane, made a bus only. This is before and after right there, right? You can plan the right turns. We took a center lane, and used to be you were waiting all along this entire stretch to get through Mercer. Made that a bus only lane and abandoned all the turns there in order to make sure that that's the priority for the bus. And you can see the two buses as it travel through, and at the intersection they get a queue jump. So boom, they get the burst through that intersection, and they're able to get and serve the riders. Here's the results. We are seeing an increase of 26% of daily riders on both the lines, and Route 40 that goes through, almost a quarter increase. On time performance increased. So now I have a reliable trip in and out of South Lake Union when using the bus. And then the travel time is improved. That's a good story, right? And you're able to create this amazing place, right? Making the place where people are taking the bus and walking and biking pleasant, and you're not next to this fast-moving traffic. That's really the key. And how people cross the street is really important. So, we take the paradigm of, God, we got to have a certain number of people in order for us to make this investment, right? And sometimes that just doesn't happen. No one was crossing here. There's no way, right? And so we put a crossing in order to relieve some of that demand with a bus lane that we added at the same time, right? This is 15th Avenue and Market, and now this year when we counted, it actually met the signal warrant for pedestrians. There's so many people using it. Once you put the safe crossing. Here's another one where we partner with the state DOT. And this is one where a new school was being built, Eagle staff. And what we're finding is that there wasn't a really nice crossing for the students. And then the existing crossing was a location where there was a lot of conflicts because all the parents were dropping off and using that street. And so we were able to get a permit from the state, because we have to get their permission, to put this in with some caveat that we need to do some measurements. So zero crossing before, they wanted us to do the after, and also what the safety data shows. So we had 6 crashes 3 years prior to the project, and no crashes 16 months after. In the entire corridor from 88 to 94th, we had a 26% reduction in all crashes and 47% reduction in injury crashes. And it also met the signal warrants because all the students are using it now. And so we're using that paradigm to do another crossing on Lake City Way, one of our other very high stressful crossing for the community. And then finally, this is my last story. When I first started, I got a lot of emails and letters from the Pike Place Market, Tom Douglas, the restaurateur, people who used the facility, our council members. They're saying that this intersection at Virginia and Western, which is a location that Pike Place Market connects to Victor Steinberg Park, is the most dangerous location. People are going to get killed. You got to come out and put in a signal. So that was my first task. So I pulled up the data. So I started in 2012, pulled up the data in 2011. For 1 hour on a Wednesday in July, at this intersection, we counted 3,600 pedestrian crossing, 3,600, right? 571 vehicle crossing, and then I looked at 10-year collision data. So 10-year collision data coming towards this intersection, there were 17 collisions. Heading southbound, there were, 26 collisions heading northbound, 7 collisions coming in, and then 3 collisions right at. And then at the intersection itself, there were a total of 2 collisions in the 10-year period. Most dangerous intersection, I gotta fix it, put a signal, 2 collisions in a 10-year, lots of people. Those collisions were damage to a parked car, so not in the collision, in the intersection, and then 1 rear end. So 10-year period, probably the most safest location in the world in Seattle. And I need to fix it and put a signal. So everybody comes to a stop. This is how it's set up, right? It's really, really pedestrian prioritized. You have to come to stop. Sorry, there's so many people, you're not going to be able to cross. That's the story of Pike Place Market. It is a very organic location, and you have to pay attention. As soon as you put in a signal, what happens? You get a red, you get a green. Oh, I get a yellow. I'm going to make it through, right? I've been waiting too long. And you got 3,300 people. Some kid that's like with their parents, right? What happens when that kid gets shoved out into the intersection? Probably within the first year, we might have an incident like that, right? Is that the right solution? Cutting off a major destination, right, to a park, and then making a situation that what was really safe, and our engineering principle tells us, you got the volumes here, put it in, right? Everything tells me that, yeah, you're probably right. We can probably get more people through here. But what people are we putting through? That's the question. So. Yes.
Thank you so much. I really like the way you use the word organization to describe sort of these processes. I was curious about freight in commercial vehicles.
Yes.
I was looking at the picture of the residential road with the double street parking, and I was like, one FedEx truck could block that whole road. So
yes.
What's going on with that?
Yes. So we have critical delivery for goods in our residential neighborhood. A lot of times we think about, that's the design vehicle that we have to accommodate. And so we wind up having this really wide street in order to accommodate the single box trucks, the ladder trucks, and now you have a highway in front of a residential street. And now you're trying to come up with solutions to impact driver behavior, because that's a nice cut-through route. I can go a little bit faster now. So for us, the freight can still happen, but that box truck's going to go really, really slow, right? And that probably is going to take the most efficient route to get to that delivery spot, rather than cutting through a bunch of different residential areas. So to us, even though urban freight delivery is really important, it has to be really thoughtful on where it's located. So in a commercial area, we definitely want to have that curb space, so that's most convenient. The alley space is available. That loading and unload zone is available to people who are have accessibility need, that foot delivery need, passenger load and unload pickup. So we manage our flex zones that way in our urban, in our larger arterial streets, but our residential streets and streets where people should be. This is a great way to have a calm street and still be able to accommodate freight delivery. What we also learned is that people would like to use some of that street for other things. And so we have a Play Street program where before you used to go through all this application in order to get permission to close the street to do that. And you have to actually go through each of the residents and say, can I get 80% buy-off, right, so that there's consensus that we can use the street. It's totally geared towards people who are connected who have time, who has the ability to contact us, and then have the consensus, right? So we learned from our pilot program that we need to make it much easier. And so now we have a program where you inform the residents. We're going to close the street. We'll still let you in and out, right? There'll be an adult here. Here's how you do it. So we have a traffic set up with a sign that you can print out. You put it on in front of your recycle bin and put it out there. And there's a person with a flashlight. So if someone needs access, they can get access, but they're doing it in a safe manner, right? So these are things that we haven't thought about, where you can repurpose the street itself. Because sometimes I think we're so wed on transportation as the only option, the only service. And really we think about street is our front door. It's where people meet,
where a lot of social interaction occur. And it's not just in our residential streets. We have Bell Street in our downtown, where there's a high portion of a residential community, and we do the exact same thing. So we've learned that there's so much we can do to provide value and serve our communities better by being flexible and innovative, and then learn from things that we've done and try to spread it out so that it's much more.
Yeah. Do you have any plans for integrating e-mobility devices like scooters and e-bikes into the existing system? And with regards to the Second Avenue road diet, are there any concerns about the increased VMT from the cars impacting the health of the more cyclists?
Yeah, definitely. I think a couple things that we learned is that electric assist removes a lot of the barrier for mobility, especially people who are not physically active or unable to climb hills. I know I'm getting to the age of being challenged. If someone's carrying loads or have kids, it provides another option, right? So we have electric assist dockless bike share that's been in place, and I think that's probably one of the highest reason that we're seeing an increase in usage in our downtown, because people who travel into downtown now they have the ability to get from point A to point B from their transit stop on a bike now to another location fairly easily, right? And then the aspect of pollution is one that we have historically put in large arterials in areas where communities who are disadvantaged. And Rainier is a great example of where we've been calling the community for the last 30, 40 years, saying, no, we need that capacity in order to handle the regional traffic. And by revising that street, now it's incremental, right? Now you create trees, put more greenery. It helps with the traffic calming again, and then having that mode, which is the transit mode, be the most efficient mode that you serve. You actually use. So the story of Seattle is that when there's a lot of congestion, there's a lot of pollution. So we need to make sure that we have what we call a desirable street that people want to be in. And so the street typology helps us do that. Along our waterfront, we used to have a double-decker viaduct. If you were on the waterfront 2 years ago, you couldn't talk to another person because it was so loud. It was very dusty, and now you go down there and it's night and day difference, right? And so there's things you can do in your city to again mitigate and address the past wrongs incrementally and wholesale, right, with large capital projects. Yes.
I was curious, does the city keep track of the number of motorcyclists and scooterists? So not push scooters or razor scooters, but mini motorcycles and the usage within the city core?
So we have traffic counts that we do, and on those turning counts, we'll classify bicycle versus motorcycle, but we don't go down to the level of scooters.
Okay.
And then we also, whenever we also count pedestrians. And what we find is that when we count an intersection, especially in an urban area, pedestrians are the biggest share of the users.
What's your share of motorcycles in Seattle? I'm just curious.
It's not that high. So, and the motorcycle riders tend to be usually in the better weather. So we do have a pretty diehard motorcycle riders, but most of the usage occurred during the summertime and springtime.
Yeah, I find your work really encouraging, and what I'm curious about is how did the Seattle DOT become so experimental, visionary, and courageous, and how do you think other cities can follow their path, kind of like maybe Portland per se?
I'm very lucky that I work in this organization. We have a city council, we have a mayor, we have our transport director that provides us the authority to do these innovative things. What they require from us is that we provide the data, right? So they give us a mandate, here's the policy mandate. Now provide us the tools so that we can address and provide the services. So example would be our play streets and our pavements of park, where we have underutilized spaces, and we partner with our parks department, we partner with the community, and we figure out how can we make the space better, right? And then we actually do surveys and get that, quantify how it's being used, and then get to a place where we can get permanent. So and again, that data portion is so important, because if you don't have the data, you're not able to move forward, right? So that data helps us. It's the right program. If it's not working, then you got to figure out why it's not working, and that data helps you.
Cities like Bellevue and even other smaller outlying suburb towns following Seattle's example?
We work very closely with a lot of our peer cities, our neighbors, and yes, we actually glean a lot of our tools from them as well. So there's a lot of dialogue back and forth. I think we're very lucky in that many of our peers are friends that we work with, and we are in ITE together. We go to ITS, so we interact quite a bit.
I noticed you gave some examples of residential traffic circles. Have you considered, or would you have thoughts on traffic circles in more heavily used streets that are traditionally signaled?
Yeah, so you're talking about modern roundabouts.
Yes.
And there is a modern roundabout that's currently being scoped for West Seattle, and then but it's not funded. There's another modern roundabout north Seattle, 145th Street, that we're working with City Shoreline. Again, it's a great tool for a certain location in a dense urban environment with a lot of pedestrians. You probably will need to signalize the roundabout because there's so many pedestrians that there will be no gap, and you'll wind up. So you have to use the right tools, but there's less surges of pedestrians and more of a more vehicle mode use, probably a good solution. Whereas the urban downtown area or urban villages, probably not the best solution. And then we also have concerns about how people who are sight impaired navigate. It's very difficult to hear when a vehicle comes, and so we want to make sure that we're using consistent tools, especially in an urban environment, so that it's easy and predictable for people to navigate. Yes.
I know you touched on this a little bit, but people in general are really resistant to any projects they feel might disincent or impede the use of their cars. So in your experience, what have been the most successful strategies to kind of get public buy-in for all these projects?
Yeah, I think it's one about what the common vision is, right? And so I worked in state DOT for the majority of my career, and that was my job, is to be able to facilitate regional traffic. And there's a need for that because the land use is set up that way. Our city, as you can see, is actually set up differently, right? So our policy tells us, and this is how it's actually law, right? So our comp plan is law. It's adopted policy by our council members, our mayor. And so what it tells us is that we want to accommodate single occupant travel, but that's not the highest priority. Our highest priority for people who are not able to afford to travel by car. We want to ensure that they're able to get to their destination and jobs in the most efficient mode. You saw those modes, right, which are walking, biking, transit, and land use is really important. And so when we are broaching these sensitive topics like on Rainier and Columbus City and Hillman City, we heard a lot from the merchants that were there. Some were very concerned about their customers, right? But good luck, how are their business going to be viable? And a lot of the businesses were saying, I can't really even have a business here because it's, customers can't cross the street, right? And so it's really about talking to the stakeholders. And then if you're able to provide the right data, right? So when we did the analysis, we said, worst case scenario would be 2 minutes delay during the peak of the peak. Is that acceptable? And when people kind of thought 2 minutes are not that bad, when you're waiting 2 hours because of collision that occurred, and it occurs every other day, people kind of understand why that's needed. And then there's all their other facilities that are nearby, like Interstate 5, and so provide that full spectrum, and then have the community understand what the trade-offs are. and then and provide that perspective in the decision making. And we were very lucky in that I work in a community that's very much focused on safety and having a great city. And then we also hear from people who are driving those trucks, right? And so they're concerned about that. So we need to be cognizant of the livelihood of people who need to get through the corridor as well. But we want to do that in a safe and sensitive manner.
I think we have to, unfortunately, cut the questions off because we have, there's another class that comes in 10 minutes and we got to do the turnover. But we will move out to the lobby here with Dongo, and he'll be able to answer some more questions before we take him to lunch at 1 o'clock. So let's give Dongo another round of applause.